Hi, and welcome back to our APES flipped classroom. Today, we're going to be talking about the carbon cycle, which is one of three biogeochemical cycles that we are going to talk about in the context of environmental science. So this one obviously focuses on carbon. So let's just jump right in and talk a little bit about an overview of the carbon cycle. So carbon, when we talk about the carbon cycle, we're talking about the movement of molecules that contain carbon between sources, those are places that generate these carbon-containing molecules, and sinks. And sinks is the term that we use to refer to a storage location for carbon. Really common forms of carbon that we're going to encounter are carbon dioxide, glucose, and methane, or CH4. And we're going to talk about the fact that carbon cycles between biotic and abiotic forms. So it cycles between existing in the living world and the non-living world. So some steps of our carbon cycle are really fast, for example, fossil fuel combustion. And some of our steps of the carbon cycle are very slow. So that would be things like sedimentation, or the formation of sedimentary rock, burial, the formation of fossil fuels. So let's take a look at our cycle here. So we can talk about carbon dioxide exists in the atmosphere, lots and lots of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So that carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is taken up by producers who convert it into sugars or glucose, which they then use for fuel. Some of those sugars stay in the plant and are converted to the structural material of the plant itself. Some of them are used in the process of cellular respiration to provide energy for the plant. And when they do that, they get converted back into carbon dioxide. So that process of photosynthesis and respiration is a quick process. Generally speaking, more carbon is converted into sugars in the process of photosynthesis than is released in the process of respiration. Now, decomposers also come into the carbon cycle here. Decomposers take the carbon that has been used in the structural components of the life forms, and depending on whether they are decomposing aerobically or anaerobically, meaning in the presence of oxygen or not in the presence of oxygen, they will then convert that carbon back into carbon dioxide if oxygen is present, or methane if oxygen is not. So decomposers that work under the soil and don't have access to oxygen create methane. Decomposers that do have access to oxygen create carbon dioxide. Now, it's also possible that dead organisms wind up being buried. If there's lots of pressure on them, we can have one of two things happen there. We can have the formation of sedimentary rock, or we can have the formation of fossil fuels. Those fossil fuels can then be extracted and burned in order to create energy. And that is a quick process of taking carbon that has been stored for hundreds of thousands of years and returning it to the atmosphere. So that's kind of our land cycle. You guys see on the left-hand side of your image there, we also have a cycle that's going on in the ocean. So carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and carbon dioxide in the ocean are in equilibrium. There's constantly carbon dioxide dissolving in the ocean, but there's equally constantly carbon dioxide coming out of the ocean. That dissolved carbon dioxide is used by photosynthesizers in ocean waters, so algae and plankton, to, just as plants do on Earth, create energy, which is then consumed by consumers. So we have the same cycles of photosynthesis, cellular respiration, and decomposition occurring in the ocean that we have on land. You also have sedimentation and burial occurring in the ocean. So the two forms of fossil fuels, if we have fossil fuels that are buried and become fossil fuels on land, that generally forms coal. Fossil fuels that formed at the bottom of ancient oceans tend to form oil and natural gas. And that just has to do with the composition of the materials that decomposed. So because we have some fast steps and some slow steps, our reservoirs or our sinks are going to store more and less carbon. We're going to have an imbalance if less is being taken out of the atmosphere and stored than is being put back into the atmosphere. The atmosphere is one of our key carbon dioxide reservoirs or carbon reservoirs. Increasing levels of carbon in the atmosphere leads to global warming. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas which traps infrared radiation within the Earth's atmosphere, warming our planet. So when we talk about a sink, we're talking about a reservoir that stores more carbon than it releases. So these are the ocean is going to store more carbon than it releases. The algae and the sediments, because on that decomposition that occurs in the ocean is not going to release carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. Long-lived plants, plants of any kind, can be considered carbon sinks because, again, that photosynthesis takes in more carbon than cellular respiration releases. And soil is also a carbon sink because it contains that decomposing organic matter. When we talk about sources, we are talking about processes that add carbon to the atmosphere. So this would be the combustion of fossil fuels. Agriculture, particularly animal agriculture, is a significant contributor to carbon in the atmosphere. Methane is also a greenhouse gas. It is a much more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. It traps much more infrared per molecule. And the process of digestion in agricultural animals releases methane into the atmosphere. Deforestation is also a significant carbon source. It releases carbon dioxide when the trees are cut or burned or pulped. And then one last source of carbon in the atmosphere is actually the creation of cement, releases a lot of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Okay, so let's talk about photosynthesis and cellular respiration. You guys are all familiar with this process from your biology classes. We know that photosynthesizers use chloroplasts and the sun's energy to convert water and carbon dioxide into glucose and oxygen. So this means that plants, photosynthesizers of all kinds, contribute oxygen to the atmosphere and remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Phytoplankton in the ocean are actually the largest contributor to photosynthesis, so the largest removers of carbon dioxide and the largest contributors of oxygen. And then we have cellular respiration, and it's important to recognize that when we talk about cellular respiration, we are not talking about breathing. We are talking about a process that all organisms do. And that process, they take in oxygen, so whether it is a plant or an animal or a phytoplankton, takes in oxygen, and if it's a consumer, it has consumed glucose. Other photosynthesizers are using the glucose that they have stored, and they convert that into energy, carbon dioxide, and water. So these are equal and opposite processes, but photosynthesis occurs at a much higher rate than cellular respiration. Both of these processes are very quick. They cycle carbon between the biosphere and the atmosphere. There's no net carbon increase in the atmosphere. And in fact, there is generally a net decrease in carbon in the atmosphere. Okay, let's talk about the ocean. So we have direct exchange in the ocean. Carbon dioxide moves directly between the atmosphere and the ocean by dissolving into the ocean water and out of the ocean water at the surface. This happens very quickly. It is in equilibrium, so there's a kind of constant balanced level of carbon dioxide between the atmosphere and the ocean. Because there is that direct exchange, increasing atmospheric carbon dioxide is also going to increase ocean carbon dioxide, which is going to create a problem we call ocean acidification, and that's where the pH of the ocean is actually decreased, which causes problems for any organisms that create shells out of our algae and our phytoplankton take carbon dioxide out of the ocean through photosynthesis, decreasing the amount of carbon dioxide in the ocean, which then allows more to dissolve from the atmosphere. Our coral reefs and our marine organisms with shells also take carbon dioxide out of the ocean to make their calcium carbonate exoskeletons. When those marine organisms die, their bodies sink to the ocean floor where they're broken down into sediments that contain carbon. So over those long periods of time, the pressure of the water is going to compress those sediments, creating sedimentary stone, so limestone and sandstone. These are long-term carbon reservoirs. Another piece of this puzzle when it comes to the ocean and the atmosphere is that at higher temperatures, the equilibrium here is going to shift and also make the ocean more acidic. Okay, so when we talk about burial and extraction and combustion. So burial is that slow geological process. It stores the carbon in underground sinks like either sedimentary rock or fossil fuels. Sedimentary rock is composed when sediments are compressed by pressure from overlying rock layers or water. In some circumstances, when we had anaerobic decomposition in an acidic environment, it can be compressed and form fossil fuels. Generally speaking, again, fossil fuels that come from land organisms, dead ferns, and peat create coal. Marine algae and plankton, upon compression, are going to create oil and natural gas. Extraction and combustion is when we dig up or drill for those fossil fuels and we burn them as energy, and that releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Burial takes way longer than extraction and combustion. So burning fossil fuels increases the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. All right, and that is it for the carbon cycle. As always, I look forward to hearing any questions, and I will see you in class.